Welcome. Hi. All right. How should I start? Here at St. Peter's, we will start live streaming in a couple of weeks. And for me, that is really an opportunity to address a topic that's been on my heart for a very, very long time. And I believe, especially after all we've been through in 2020, with the lockdown, with not being able to sing or to gather as a church community, we have to address this topic. And here at St. Peter's and live streaming, I believe we need to address it even more because our responsibility on the topic of worship increases when we go live online. Also, we want to use this teaching series to build up our team and to come to mutual understanding of what we're doing, not just as live production team or sound team, but as the whole worship team and as a worshiping community. So, our topic is worship. What is worship? And if you think about it hard enough, maybe you realize very, very soon that the word worship is a bit complicated. And that is mostly the English language, to be honest. We use one word to describe several different things. For example, many of you probably think about worship music or posture they have while worshipping. See, I'm using the term to describe what I'm trying to describe. Worship is a really difficult term. So we have worship music, we have a worship service, like we call the gathering itself worship. But then also we all kind of know that worship is more than music. Very, very often, and sadly I hear the term like, oh no, we know that worship is more than music. It's being creative, it's expressing ourselves to God. But what we now mean is music. And then we narrow it down on music again. And I think that is the fatal point. That is where we break our neck and where we go wrong. And where we go very, very far from what we read, what biblical worship looks like. So what is worship? Worship is many things. And trying to be more specific in what I'm saying, I want to introduce a different term or several different terms. So when I talk about music, I will say music or maybe sung worship. When I talk about a service and everything that plays into that, like prayer, the music, the preach, and all of that, we call liturgy. Because liturgy basically just means order of service. So we have sung worship and liturgy, and then we have worship as a posture, worship as a lifestyle. Worship as our response to God. Worship as obedience. Worship as discipleship. Worship as something that is more than an activity. And this is where we want to start. What is worship? If we look at the Bible and how the Bible uses the term worship, we find different terms. Surprise, surprise. For example, we find liturgia in Greek, liturgy, which means order of service, or just service for each other. We find the word proskuneo, which means leaning forward to kiss. Interesting form of worship that I guess no one ever thought of. But that is the most common word in the Greek language to describe worship. And this is what I want to focus on today. Proskuneo, lean forward to kiss. That is an emotion, that is a posture. That is something else than an activity that we do. It's something that humbles us. And the word is mostly used in court or in the throne room of a king, where people come in and bow their faces to the ground. Perhaps you've seen the film Martin Luther and have seen him praying in a very, very specific posture, and that is on his face, belly on the floor, lying on the floor, arms stretched out, in form of a cross in front of the cross. You can't get lower than that. That is proskuneo. That is the posture that Bible describes as worship. And I want to challenge you, next time you start worshipping, whatever form that is for you. Perhaps during lockdown it won't be our gathered liturgical service. Maybe it won't be communion singing. But maybe it's in your room when you listen to sung worship, to worship music, whether it's contemporary, whether it's old hymns, whether it's your mum singing in the kitchen. Why don't you take a moment and worship before God? Lie yourself down on the floor. Humble yourself. Appreciate you for who you are before the living God. Nothing but a simple creature. And when we find ourselves in this posture, I think we understand a lot more what worship is. What worship is about. Let's be honest, when we talk about worship in the contemporary form as music, as what we prefer in our liturgical services, what we really worship is us. What we really worship is our tradition and our preferences. And that's why we divide as church, isn't it? Is our worship, or what we call worship, really the posture of humility and lying down before God and saying, this is not about me because I'm that small, but it's about you. It's about God and nothing and no one else. Proskuneo. It's a posture. Proskuneo. How do I know this? I study theology. Not everyone can do this, but in every video I want to give a book recommendation. And the one for today is Engaging with God. I will put up the graphic of the book at the end of the video and give a short information on the book. But it's David Peterson, A Biblical Theology of Worship. In all fairness, the first book that I want to introduce to you is very, very boring. It's very hard to read, but welcome to the life of a theologian. You have to read some books that are just very boring, but what you learn is life-changing. What you learn is biblical truth, and that kind of is a metaphor for worship, isn't it? Sometimes it's a bit dry, but again, it's not about you. So in this book, Peterson takes very many different words from the Hebrew and the Greek language, from the Old and New Testament, and really digs deep into what the meaning of biblical worship is. Because proskuneo and liturgia is only two words in the Greek language, but there are more in the Greek and even more in the Hebrew language. But enough about words. Let's look at the Bible and see what kind of worship we find there. And this will be the introduction, so we will take some time to introduce the topic of worship. We will take at least 2 or 3 videos to focus on biblical worship, a biblical understanding of worship and what we can learn from it and how we should change our worship accordingly. And then we will have loads and loads of topics on how we practically change our worship, how we practically work as teams in a church, in the different types of worship, whether it's sung worship, creative worship, production worship, or liturgic worship, all the different parts. We will look at that and find, well, at least that's my aim, find the best way for you and for us to implement that in church. Let's start at the beginning. In the beginning, God created. In the beginning, God created. the heaven and the earth. And then he started forming different forms, plants and animals, sky and the land. I don't want to go into a theology of like a creational theology, what it means that 7 days. That is none of our business here. But the creation account in Genesis 1, 2 and even 3 tells us something very, very important about worship. And what I want to focus on today is that the Creator God, who created heaven and earth and is still forming this planet into something beautiful, created us, man and women, in His image. What does that mean? That means that we carry something of God's glory in us as individuals, but the whole picture needs to focus on all humankind. That's why we need church. That is why God says, where two or three are together, there I am. Because we are created as plural in His image. What does it mean that we are created in the image of the Creator? God's creativity is within us. God's longing to express something in beautiful forms is within us. And I believe with all my heart that we are created in this way so that we can worship in this way. We have something of the glory of God inside of us so that we can reflect it back. And that is worship. Worship is response to a God who stretched out to us. Worship is all about God. All about God. No one and nothing else. Worship is not about how we feel. Worship is not about if we are in the mood. Because worship is not about us. It is all about God. And that means that everything we do should reflect this act of God, that He created us in His image. Everything we do should be a response to Him creating us. And that also means that He created us in His image. You are beautifully made. Period. No matter what anyone else says, no matter what you think when you look in the mirror. If you despise yourself, that is a disservice to God. If you despise anyone else, that is a disservice to God. Because every person is created in the image of God. And that is the start of worship. Accepting who you are in God. Accepting everyone else in God. Appreciating and loving His creation that He came to die for. That's the basis of worship. That it's about God. My favorite Bible verse really taught me something that every one of us needs to learn, and that is to shut up. Shut up and believe that God is God. Psalm 46 verse 10. Be still and know that I am God. It is a very polite translation of what it actually says. It really is, shut up. Stop your thinking. Stop worrying, stop dreaming, stop criticizing, and focus on the one thing that you need to know. The only thing that you need to know. That He's God. The psalm and this verse describes a situation of war. I don't know if you can worry any more than in a war situation, where you have to worry for your life and for the lives of those you love. And also a situation where you feel more with hate than anything else. Hate for your enemies. Hate for those who persecute you, who try to kill you and the people that you love. Psalm 46 describes a situation where the world is tumbling, where the foundation of the world is shaken, where nothing is secure. And God speaks into the situation. Be still and know that I'm God. That is worship. Acknowledging who God is and who we are in relation to Him. And there you have it. That's our first part. I know a bit, perhaps unexpected, perhaps and hopefully challenging, but this is it. Worship is all about God and not about you. We are creation, He's creator. We are worshippers, He's the one to be worshipped. That is where we need to start. If we get that wrong, everything else won't be quite right. Even though good intentions, but sometimes good intentions are not good enough. So let's start here. Worship is all about God. We must not get this wrong. So I hope and invite you to journey along on this road to discover what worship is. We as a church really want to get it right. So let us learn together a new form, the old form of worship. See you next week.